Hey, welcome back to the Progressive Brothers podcast. This is Mike V, episode 3. Just wanted to do a quick response to some of the criticisms that I've been hearing the last election cycle about why don't progressives, fight the culture war. Well, let me give you my take on this. My position is progressives focus on policy, they don't focus on culture. And I think what happens in the black spaces is that there's a desire to try and go back to this time period in American history where they say things were more patriarchal or things were more traditional and things of that nature. Even though most of these people are millennials or zennials or even Gen Xers for that matter, who think that, yeah, you can go back to 1950 where things were great. But in reality, there's no sort of evidence that there was this great period for black people, especially black men at this time. And so you don't get the emancipation without progress. You don't get black people's ability to vote without progress. You don't get the civil rights movement without progress. You don't get, integration of schools and, minimum wages without progress. And I think what happens here is the culture warriors would prefer to ignore all of that and go back to a time that they didn't live, to romanticize a time that never, a history that never really happened. And so for me, fighting the culture war is a waste of energy. See, you fight the culture war when you don't have the ability to fight the actual wars that are necessary to fight. The wars I want to fight are the wars of policy. That's where the rubber meets the road. It's an uphill battle for all wars, but when it comes to culture war, it's a battle going uphill for, a result that's actually empty. There's nothing on top of that hill that you're going to win, that you can actually point to that's tangible. And so I think for a lot of times, the culture warriors want to place us in a box and say, you're not really committed to the community or to the people unless you actually fight the culture war first. But what is this culture war that they're trying to fight? They're trying to fight this sort of matriarchy, gynocracy, leftism, liberalism, and these few other isms, socialism and all these other things, but they don't really have a way to replace it. They only have an idea to go back to a time that they never really lived themselves, nor can they ever replicate from a public discourse standpoint. They can never really go back and say, well, let's go back to 1945 or 1950 or 1955. They always point back to 1965. They always talk about the Moynihan report. They always talk about Moynihan scissors. They always, leverage these sort of periods in time that were reported, but they themselves never lived it. And so to go back to that time would also mean that you have to reverse a lot of other areas as well of progress. And that's not something that's not something that's worth fighting for, because to take 2 steps forward and 1 step backwards doesn't make any sense. Why don't we just take 2 steps forward and not go back at all? Or why do I have to be the one to actually go back, right? If you want to go back there, you can go back there. But while you go back, I go forward. That's the point of the progressive movement. And so I think sometimes people want to fight this culture war to a point where they're okay with destroying the rest of society just to get, the vanity of a victory. They never really put a whole lot of emphasis behind, okay, if I fight, women's liberation or emancipation post 1965, this is a fight that's worthy of me as a black male. I'm not seeing the results of it. There's a lot of momentum on the progressive side to, you know, whether they're for women's rights or liberation or whatever it is, that's an uphill battle. That's not my fight. That's not the progressive fight or the progressive black male fight. So I say, why do we have to get involved in that culture war? It's more non-secular than it is not, because it's all focused on beliefs. The belief of, you know, a matriarchy, a gynocracy, these sort of ideas. In reality, you don't have the power to overturn that. You're just one person or a few people. It doesn't matter what you think about it. I say, ignore it. You don't like rainbow flags? Ignore it. Why can't you focus on the policy? Well, you don't want to focus on policy because that requires more effort and more work. That means you have to sit down and actually read urban planning and policy and other forms of governance that would bring you to a point of progress, but you don't want to follow the process. And that's where we have our differences. I'm not going to go out there and wrestle with a bear, you know, when I don't have to. I can sit in my cabin in my rocking chair. I don't need to focus on these type of things. It makes no sense to me to fight a culture war when the culture war is something I don't have to fight. I can just go around it. There were a lot of people who are Luddites that did not like, you know, these Tesla charging stations being put there. You know, these pickup trucks who block, you know, these charging stations at these parking lots. You know, whether it's Walmart or some other place, Whole Foods or something like that. You know, they call it icing. And these internal combustion engine pickup trucks, you know, what they call bulldozers, were blocking these Tesla chargers to stop the Tesla owners from charging their cars. Those are culture warriors too. But they also came up with alternatives to keep these guys or these people from actually blocking the Tesla charge station so that the Tesla owners couldn't charge their vehicles. Culture warriors exist in all factions, but for the progressive brothers, we don't have that issue. See, I look at the policy aspect and say, that's a form of vandalism. I'm going to file a complaint. I'm going to leverage the system to my advantage, and I'm going to get that pickup truck out of that, that charging station port so that I can charge my vehicle. I'm going to leverage the system so that it makes sense for me in the long run, rather than to put up a fight in the short run. Because nothing good is going to come from that fight. I'm still not going to be able to move that pickup truck so I can charge my vehicle. I'd rather just call the police and file a complaint and call Tesla and let them know that this is even happening, right? Using the system to your advantage, focusing on policy to actually enable transformation. These are the areas that progressive brothers fight, not the culture war. The culture war is not a winning strategy. It gets a lot of attention because there's a lot of people who are politically ignorant and unwilling to follow the process. But the reality is the culture war is the war that you fight when you're too weak to fight the actual wars that need to be fought. I'm not for that. I don't believe that progressive brothers should be for that. And at the end of the day, you're not going to get anything out of it. Most guys who claim to be conservative don't really know what conservatism is. The classic liberal is a conservative. Thomas Jefferson was a liberal who, helped, structure this Constitution. But in today's terms, he would be considered a conservative. But most Black men who claim to be conservative don't really know what conservatism is. And so they try to fight that war, that culture war, because they think that that's the war that needs to be fought as a priority. And they don't realize that you expended all of your political and social capital, boxing a ghost. Because who are you really at war with? Well, I'm at war with the opposite sex. Okay. How's that working out for you? They picked a side, they chose a side, they organized. That's how they got their people into office. That's how they got agendas passed. You're worried about Goldman Sachs giving $10 billion, but the ink isn't even dry on the paper. Why are you so worried about this? Why aren't you fighting for your own $10 $10 billion for black men? Why aren't you focusing on getting your people into office? Why aren't you focusing on, more transformative initiatives, more social equity programs, more training programs, vocational training, things of that nature, things that can actually be leveraged with a little bit of research and a little bit of due diligence? I see a lot of people who say, well, that doesn't really move me, that doesn't move the people. But in reality, if all you're concerned about is galvanizing a whole bunch of numbers to do nothing, then that's not a battle that needs to be fought from the Progressive Brothers side. And so, to wrap this up, I'm just saying the culture war is a war that you fight when you're too much of a coward and too weak to fight the actual war that needs to be fought, and Progressive Brothers don't need to be fighting that war. Thank you all for listening. Please hit the like button, share if possible. Also check us out on Twitter at brothers_podcast. You all have a nice day.